What's up, what's up? Happy Tuesday morning. Hope you had a good Labor Day. Went swimming yesterday for the last time, and it was fantastic. But it's good to be back in the office. So today, real quick, I'm going to show you how to solve a really difficult problem, I think, in React. Debouncing asynchronous side effects. It's kind of a mouthful. But I think a lot of people run into this eventually, and knowing how to solve it is very valuable. So I'm going to show you how to do that today. Really quick. I've updated my Patreon. You guys can go check it out. Easy to support me and my videos and my open source development. Working on React table and React charts. Even looking into doing some React training videos now for React table, which could be really, really fun. I'm working on the outline right now. React table is kind of my most active project right now. If you don't use it for tables in React, you probably should, because it'll make your life a lot easier. So go check it out. And also, broadcasting from the Nozzle headquarters, my startup. If you want to know everything that Google knows about search results and where you rank and your competitors rank and whatnot, give us a call, give us a shout out, connect with us. We know a lot about Google. Can probably tell you things that you'd want to know. So let's get to it. We've got Code Sandbox right here. I'm going to start from blank. We're going to set up kind of a little fake scenario here for something that we'd like to debounce. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up an input. Value is going to be, we'll just call it seed. On change, we're going to take the event. We're going to set the seed. Whoa. I don't know what that autocomplete was. To the E target value. We're going to set up that seed up here as some state equals React state. Use state blank string. All right, and we're going to close off that input. Okay. Yay, saving some stuff. Another nice thing to do here, we're going to actually pre-code output JSON stringify. We're going to put the seed right there, and that way we can see kind of what it equals. Oh, get rid of that terrible default styling, please. There we go. All right, so now we can see our state. By the way, if you guys have any questions throughout the video, let me know. I'll try and answer them as we code. If not, I'll get to them at the end. All right, so first of all, we need to set up a side effect, something that's going to happen in our app. This is kind of a contrived example, as usual. So going to set up an effect here, use effect, that is going to synchronize some state between our seed and give us a random number. So let's see, random, set random. And every time the seed changes, we want to get a new random number, right? So let's say set random math.random. So let's see, oop, forgot our little arrow there. Okay, we'll take random and we will log it out right here. So every time seed changes, right, you'll see that random is now changing. It's an effect. Now this works really nicely right now because it is a synchronous side effect. Nothing like every time that we type in here, the number is going to change. It's really quick. There's not a whole lot of power being expended here to create this random number. But as soon as this becomes asynchronous, we might run into some problems. So let's do that. We're going to set up a, let's see, we're going to set up a little promise here. In fact, yeah, why don't we just do a set timeout? And we'll put the set random inside of there. We're going to delay this for 500 milliseconds. So every time that we type, you'll see it start to change. In fact, let's delay it a little bit longer, a second, so you can see what's happening here. I'll type really fast, and then it will kind of like stutter through all those different changes, right? And it's like it's replaying every single keystroke that I had. Well, what if we wanted it to be done, like if we didn't want that to run until we were done typing, how would we do that? Even if I go like, yeah, you'll see it kind of follows you, stutters through. Let's make this a little bit more realistic. Let's make a function here called like get random number from server. We're just going to, this is going to be an async function, and we'll just use a promise. Return a new promise, resolve, and we'll say set timeout, and we'll resolve it. Let's see, we will resolve this with math.random, and we'll do it after 2 seconds. Okay. So instead of set random, just doing it right here, let's say we were interacting with some type of a server. Like this is actually very common. Like you'll type into a search box, right? And then you'll want to send that search string out to your server to search for something. The server comes back with something, right? You don't want to be sending out, you know, a request for every single letter that you type into here. And that's why we need to debounce this string. So let's set that up. We can't return an async function inside of this effect. So we're just going to set up a little hack here to use the async syntax inside of an effect. So that's a self-executing function right there, if you've never seen that. That's just defining the function and then saying run it. But it lets us use async right there. We can't put async right here because that would return a promise in the effect, which is illegal. So what we're going to do is we're going to say await get random number from server. So this is going to be the random number, and then we're going to set the random number onto there. So you'll see we start typing. Yeah, see, if our server took 2 seconds to do that, in fact, let's do this. Let's see how many times we actually call this side effect. Console log try get random number from server. So you'll see every single time we type, it's trying to call this effect, right? And if this was a real call going out to a server, we would be generating, you know, some asynchronous call like in the network tab for every single thing that we type. That is ridiculous. We don't want to do that. So we need to build a debouncer. First, before we do that, I'm going to show you another problem that might happen. What if this server function right here, what if what we were doing on the server took like a random amount of time to succeed, right? What if sometimes it took a second, sometimes it took 5 seconds? Well, let me show you, let me illustrate one of the problems here. What if the first request you sent out, what if you were typing and you typed like Bill, right? And you wanted to go search for Bill. And Bill took 5 seconds to complete, right? 5 seconds. But before that request finished and came back, you changed it to Billy. And for some reason, Billy only took 1 second to complete. Well, do you know what would happen is that 1 second request for Billy would complete, and you'd be like, oh great, I got that request back for Billy. But then this request for Bill would complete 5 seconds later, and it would overwrite, like it would trigger the logic that comes after this, and it would overwrite the random, or whatever the return function was for this effect. So really what you want is, you only want to be taking the last version of this effect. I hope that makes sense, and I'll try and be more clear with that in a minute. But if you're searching for a bunch of things really quickly, you know, Billy Bob, right? If you're searching for a bunch of things really quickly, then you only want to take the last search. Like basically, if some new search is executed, you want to cancel the old ones because they don't mean anything to you anymore. And if they do mean anything, or they don't, but they come back still, they have an opportunity to like really mess up your state. So not only do we want to debounce our input side effects, but we also want to take the latest and, in a sense, debounce our responses coming back. So we're going to do both of those in a single hook. So let's start off by, let's see, I'm going to call this use bouncer. Okay. And what this bouncer is going to do is it's going to take a function and it's going to take a delay. And it's going to allow us to call this function. It's going to return a bouncer, which is a function. And that function is going to be able to be called as many times as we want. And it's only going to fire off after the delay is done. After each individual action has been taken on it, it will set a new delay, and at the end of that delay, it will fire the function. And that will let us debounce the side effects going into the input. It's also going to set up some take latest logic, so that if we have fired off multiple asynchronous actions and they're coming back at different random times, it's only going to take the one that is the latest version. And all the while, we're going to make sure that our input is always up to date with what the user wants to see. So the first thing we need to do is bouncer is going to be a function that we can call. Let's see what this would look like. So if this was our function that we wanted to debounce, right, we'd want to set it up outside of our app. So let's do get random number from server debounced. And we're going to call use bouncer, and we're going to pass it our function that we want, and then we're going to pass it the delay, and we'll say 500 milliseconds. So we'll be able to keep typing for 500 milliseconds before it will actually fire off this function. And we're going to call that from here. Get random number from debounce server, and we'll send it our seed right there. We're also going to have to send get debounced, put this in our effect right here. And this isn't going to change very often, because up here we are going to use React use callback to make sure that it's not changing too often. So every time that the function or the seed changes, it's going to call our effect. It's going to call get random number from server debounced, right? It's going to call this function every single time. So let's actually log something right here that says side effect. And then up here we'll have the try get random number from server. And let's see, in our use bouncer, what we want to do is this this bouncer function that we're being given is probably going to have some arguments. And right here, like we're sending through the seed. Say you needed to send through whatever this string was to the server so that it could give you a random number based on that seed. So we're going to send through the seed. So where does that argument come out? Up here in this function, it would come out right here. So it'd be seed. But we want to make this like a utility library for everything that we can use. So we're going to grab all of the arguments coming through on this function. And eventually we're going to be calling the actual function with the args like this. Okay. So if we did this right now, it would actually work. Let's see. Yeah. It just has a delay on it still, and it's replaying all those numbers again. We don't want it to do that. We want to debounce based on a set timeout. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of a timeout. And I'm just going to use a single ref here for all this stuff because it's just easier to do. And I'm just going to have it be an object. And what I'm going to do is when this bouncer function is called, I'm going to check to see if there is already a timeout being called, or in practice, right? Or if it's been created. And if it has, I'm going to clear that timeout. Because if someone types again, we want to reset the timer so that we can keep typing. That's what debouncing is. So we want to clear the timeout. We want to pass that timeout that was created. And then we're going to create a new one. So let's just annotate this. Clear the old timeout if one exists. Then we're going to set a new timeout. And we're going to make that timeout value the new timeout right here. Oh, and actually right here we're going to have to set that to undefined. Could also delete it, but set it to undefined for now. And then we're going to set a new timeout right here. We're going to set it to use the delay that we pass in right here. And then when that timeout finishes, actually we're not going to do that right there. When that timeout finishes, we're going to call this function. And then we're going to set the timeout to undefined so that if a new one wants to happen after that, it will. And let's see, this is saying we need to add function and delay to our dependencies. So if function or delay change, it's going to give us a new version of this. That means that this cannot be an asynchronously defined function here. So we're going to say, we're going to call this get random number from server. Get random. You know what? We don't need to do that. We can make it inline. And there's a way to do that. What we're going to do is instead of making a function, just taking it as a raw value right here, we're going to just update it on this ref every time. So we're going to say ref.current function equals function. So we're just going to keep the latest version of the function that gets passed on this ref right here. And then right here, we'll call ref.current.function. Then we don't need it in our dependency list right there. So let's see if this works a little bit. If I type Tanner La 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 la. Awesome. So let's see what's happening here. It is calling our function. You can see try get random number from server is getting called. So if I type a bunch, it waits 500 milliseconds and only calls try get random number from server one time. Even though the side effect here is getting called every single time the seed changes, this function right here is only getting called 500 milliseconds after the last instance of that being called. So if I wait 500 milliseconds between each thing, it gets updated. Or if I type a bunch like this, it waits. But something funny is going on, like this value isn't really updating when I expect it to. This random number from like await get random number from server, console log random. I don't think it's actually a random number. Oh, it is. Get random number from server. Oh, it is. It is a random number. That's right. It's working. Okay. So it is working. So if we start typing here, it waits 500 milliseconds, and then it says, go try to get a random number from the server, and then the server comes back 200 milliseconds later with the value. So if one goes and gets it, 2 seconds later comes back object random 0. Okay, but what we haven't done yet, though, is addressed the problem where this may take longer for different things. It's that whole Bill, Billy, Billy, Bob problem, right? Where if the first request takes a really long time, but it's outdated, and then comes back, it might resolve a little late and mess up our state. And we can probably illustrate that by doing like, let's just have our server respond, at different random times between 0 and 10 seconds. So if I type TAN, so one of them came back, another one came back, another one came back really late. So what's different here is this is not necessarily the first one that actually happened, this one right here. It could have been the third one that got called. This one could have been the second one. We need to basically cancel the old ones, the old calls. How do you cancel a call that's already gone out? Well, you can't really cancel the call, but you can just not react to it. So how do we do that? What we'd want to happen is anything after, like, let's see right here. We would have to move this logic right here. So we would want to debounce the actual server function right here is what we'd want to do. And then we want to move this logic down here. So all right. Can I use the keyword await? Ah, that's right. We have to do our little hack here. Or we could just use a promise. I think that we don't need to use the await syntax here, and I'll show you. We can just do .then, and we'll get back the random number. We can just use a promise. We don't have to use all that stuff. Okay, that way we don't have to do any funky business inside of this effect. So the side effect goes off. get random number from server. We'll just say this one right here fires off. We're going to keep good logs to make sure that this is actually working. And then when we get back the random number, we want to set random. We'll say console log random. Okay, and then we'll set it. Get random number from server. We're getting an error here. Let's see what's happening. Cannot read property then of undefined. Oh, I see what's going on here. This is perfect. This is leading us right into the next thing we need to build into this hook. So get random number from server debounced is great. It's debouncing the value, but it's not returning a promise. That's the thing is, there's a lot of debounce functions out there that you can use. Lodash has one, underscore. There's even a use debounce hook that you can find out there. But not a lot of them, if any of them, handle asynchronous functions, right? If the function you're debouncing is asynchronous, that means it returns a promise, and it needs to resolve and do a bunch of promise logic under the hood too. And up until now, our use bouncer, our little debouncer function here, is pretty simple. But when you start doing things with promises, this can get a little confusing. Hopefully I can show you guys how to build one that isn't going to blow up in your face. So first things first is instead of keeping track of a timeout here, we're going to start by keeping track of a promise. Clear out the old promise if one exists. And we're not actually going to be clearing out an old promise. What we're going to be doing is waiting on a new promise. So what we're going to say is if ref.current, if there is no promise, if there hasn't been a promise made already, we're going to make a new promise. So promise equals new promise, resolve, reject, because we need to handle errors too. And then we're going to take the resolve and reject functions from that promise, and we're going to store them as the resolve and reject. We're going to put them on our ref so that we can use them outside of here. So we'll create a new promise, and then we will keep track of resolve and reject. Okay? So now we know that a promise is always going to be there, right? Next thing is we have to keep track of our timeout. And then we're already doing that here, and that's fine. So if there is a timeout running, then we need to clear it. And then right down here, our set timeout is going to get a little interesting. It's going to become asynchronous. And not only is it going to become asynchronous, but we're going to be mixing like promises and timeouts a little bit. So what we need to do is we need to keep track of the latest instance that that has been called with this asynchronous function. So if Bill and then Billy Bob get called, and we only want to use the last one, we need some way to keep track of how many instances have been of this asynchronous function have been called, and a way to quote unquote cancel the previous ones and only take the latest one. And I think the best way to do that is to just use a ref with an ID. And you might use a random ID here, but I'm just going to use an incrementing ID because it's easy to keep track of. And so when an asynchronous request goes out, we want to give it a unique ID. And so we're going to say const ID, and we're just going to use the last ID incremented. and we're going to increment that ID as well, so that the next one we do also gets a unique ID. 0, 1, 2, self-incrementing. And then after we have the ID, we want to be able to see, let's see, we also want to update the ref current ID with the ID. So let's see, ref current ID, debounce. Sorry, I have a little cheat sheet up here so I don't forget how to do this stuff. Debounced ref. This is what's happening. So we get an ID, which is whatever it was plus 1. So we just get a new ID. It could be math random for all we care. And then we set the ref current ID to that ID. We could just do the plus plus, but this is easier. It's a little more direct. And then after that, we're going to execute our function. So we are going to await this. We're going to get the response. And we're going to await whatever it is, the function that we're debouncing, we're going to await it, which means we need to put it inside of a try-catch block here. And when that response comes back, we are going to use the ref current resolve. We're going to use the resolve function that we got up here from the promise that we created to resolve that value. And likewise down here for the error, we're going to say ref.current reject response, or error right there. And then, yeah, that's pretty straightforward, right? But we said we only want to be taking the latest version. We want the responses, or we want the requests to go out when they should. But if the request is outdated by this point right here, is the request outdated? We want to say if the request is outdated, ignore any code beyond here. How do we do that? Well, the best way is we know that every time an async request goes out, this ref.current.id is being incremented. So one thing we could do is we could say if our local ID, if the ID for this request does not equal the current ID for this hook, then we don't want to do anything, just like want to bail out. Don't do anything at all. Or better yet, we could say if it does equal this hook, then resolve. Otherwise, don't. Right? And we could just put this up here. And likewise, we could say if it's not up to date, we also don't want to trigger any of the error handling either. Because if it's out of date, we don't really care. If an error occurs, who cares? It's an out-of-date request. It's not a big deal. So we only want to do that if we're up to date here too. And we can even turn this into a convenience function. We could say const check latest. It's just a function that returns if the ID of this request equals the latest ID of the entire hook. And after all of this is said and done, we also, even if it fails or rejects, right, what we want to do is if it is the latest one and if it finishes, then we want to make sure that we reset the ref. So it's ref current.promise equals undefined. And that way we know that the promise has completed, and now if we call this function again, it will create a new promise to return. All right, so now we know that it's only taking the latest value. Let's see what the error is that we're getting here really quick. Cannot read property then of undefined. So we're still not returning the promise. Well, that's easy to do. So right here in our bouncer, in this function, we call it with args, we're going to return ref.current.promise. Cool. So now we type a bunch. It only calls get random number from server one time. Get random number from server comes back. Whoa, it came back a ton. So obviously something is not working correctly. Let's see what I might be missing. And all right, let's do a little simpler example. T calls a side effect, calls get random number from server. Get random numbers from server comes back. We only want to be React current timeout. So if there's not a promise, we're creating a new one and we're returning resolve and reject. So this is taking care of all the promise stuff. So if there is a promise, it's not going to do anything, and eventually we'll return the promise. If there is a timeout going, it will clear the timeout, and then it will create a new one, and we'll get a new ID, and then we'll increment that ID right here. In fact, we can just do this. We'll do ++. No, that's discouraged. This is a little easier to read what's going on. We get that new ID and we update it to the ref.currentID. We make a check latest function to see if we are in fact the latest version. And then we send out a request. We await our function with the args. Get back the response. And if we're the latest, we resolve. And if we're the latest, we reject. If we're the latest, we set current promise to undefined. And then we also set the timeout to undefined right here. Interesting. Let's see what exactly is happening. So let's see, console log bouncer try. I'm going to type TANNER, bouncer tried once, get random number from server, but get random number from server is coming back for every single time that I call. Get random number from server should only be called let's see, it should only be called once, is really what should be happening. So why would it be getting called multiple times? Get random number from server, debounced, use bouncer, current ref function. But see, here's what's interesting. Bouncer try only went off one time. And get random number from server. Oh, I see what's happening. Ah, perfect. I actually was going to need to handle this use case. And I even just ran into it myself. So if you can see what's happening here, this dot then, right? Dot then is, it's running dot then for even outdated promises. So even though the promise is old, we're still resolving it. And this set random is getting called with old value, with the latest value, but a bunch of times. And that's not right. If we we really only want the dot then for the whole word Tanner to be called, not every single version of it in between. So what we can do here is just not resolve promises that are out of date. And that should be happening already. So the first response goes out, or the first request goes out, it comes back, check latest, ID equals, so if check latest, ref current resolve response. But see, every single call should be getting its own promise, is what it should be. So we're going to switch around this logic a little bit. We're going to say if there is a promise, we're going to ignore it. We're always going to be creating a new promise, is what's going to be happening. So every time that bouncer, yeah, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. We only want, no. It's every time that the timeout gets called, we're going to be creating a new promise. So we have to create the promise in this top level. So every single time we call it, it's going to be getting the promise. And then we're returning the promise right here. We keep track of ref current promise resolve. Current promise resolve equals resolve. Let's see if this works. So if we type TANNER, bouncer try, get random number from server, and it only calls it one time. Boom. So let's make sure instead of sending through a random number, we're going to make this a little more. We're going to say echo debounced. We're going to just use an echo function. Echo from server, word. And we're just going to resolve the same word that we sent through. And seed, we're just going to call it word. Okay, so now if I type Tanner, it should echo back Tanner, except it's not random. So it echoed back nothing, type hello, bouncer went off, hello. Now I'm going to do this one. I'm going to type Bill, let it go off, Billy, let it go off, Billy Bob, right? And it's going to debounce all of those different requests going out, and it's only going to come back, it should only come back with Billy Bob right there. Even though the other ones may have come back later, we only take the latest version. So let's get rid of all our logs. Okay, let's document this just a little bit more to make sure that it's good. So we are creating a ref to keep track of latest things. Always use the latest function that is passed. And that also lets us not put function into the dependency array for this bouncer right here, just the delay. Create the debounced function. We want to proxy all arguments to our debounced function. I want to create a new promise, keep track of resolve and reject, and then we want to clear out the old timeout if it exists, create a new timeout. We want to get a new ID for this async request. Update the hook with the latest ID, latest request ID. We want to make a check latest function to make sure that we're only reacting to the latest request that has gone out. We want to run the debounced function. If the response is latest, resolve. And likewise, if the response is latest, reject with the error. And if the response is latest, set up for a new promise. Actually, ref current promise is always getting reset, so we don't even need to do that now. You can just have it be that. And when the timeout is done, we want to reset the timeout. Not when the promise is done. It's when the timeout runs. Let's see. When the timeout runs, we want to reset the timeout right there. Equals undefined. I think that's what we want to do. Random 10 seconds is kind of a long time to wait, but it should echo. There we go. Okay, and then want to return the promise. Always return the promise. Okay. Want to, in our example, get a debounced version of our function, echo from server. And then in our effect, we're going to go and try and get the echo, set echo. Try to get an echo, but only after we're done typing for, oh my goodness, 500 milliseconds. And set echo, or echo from server, is an asynchronous function. It will only take the latest version. Let's see. Set the latest version, or set the latest response to the echo. And likewise, we would do .catch error, and we could say echo, set echo, there was an error. We'll set the error. And just for funsies, we will have this reject half the time. And we'll change this to 4 seconds because 10 seconds is really long. So math.random is greater than 0.5. We will reject. Oh no. And we'll return. Okay. There was an error. Oh no. Let's echo Tanner Lindsley. Come on, baby. Oh, there was an error. Oh no. It probably, oh no. We'll say error ID. Math.random. That way we'll know if it actually changed. So let's see. We'll search for Tanner Lindsley. And it will be like, yay, it echoed back. We'll say Jalen. That's my wife's name. There's an error. Oh no, error ID. Blah, 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 blah. We'll type some more. It only took the latest version. And I believe it should have been a new error ID. Maybe it was. It was too small to know. Too small of a change between error and math randoms to understand. All right, I'm good with that. Okay, this is our debouncer. Yeah, if you're wondering like, oh, this all looks very familiar, well, it's because it is. On my Twitter, I tweeted about this a couple days ago, about how to build this. Exactly. Maybe not exactly. Our version is actually a lot better, so that we built here today. But yeah, I call it use bouncer, and just showed you how to build it. You can now debounce asynchronous functions and only take the latest version. So this is very handy. I use it all over the place in Nozzle and my own projects. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, if you like this video or you like my content, you should go become a patron. I have a $1 tier, $5 tier. It is not much to help me make sure that I can keep making these videos and creating open source projects like React Table, React Charts, and React Form. So yeah, subscribe to my YouTube channel too. Hopefully can have some more videos like this coming for the rest of the week. Thanks for listening, and see you later.